potentially it's an incredibly creative place to be and to work and to think about all the good stuff that comes out of living in cities. So there's that huge kind of challenge there about how tourism and how the relationship between tourism and our history and heritage in York stifles thinking creatively about the future. I remember when I first came here, there were things like fireworks in Clifford's Tower, and there was illuminating York and all sorts of stuff which kind of felt like it crossed over from being for local people but also being for tourists coming into the city. I do greatly kind of mourn the fact that those things have gone. It's about the fact that much of the tourism within the city seems to have kind of ended up being about Harry Potter, that kind of fake narrative about what York's about. Through the work we've been doing around York Central, we've run events there with the local community, events looking at the local heritage and about the community's part in that. And we had a load of local people come along to that, telling fabulous stories about the neighbourhood that they were part of. And you could almost see their eyes kind of look in their eyes about, I'm not the only one who remembers that. Therefore, as local people, we're not just random local people who happen to live there, but they were, in some ways, kind of custodians of that history of the place. It goes beyond Harry Potter, it goes beyond the Vikings, and it starts to pick up on histories which not only are personal but also have a connection with the future. The work I've been doing most recently around York Central and the kind of creation of a new part of the city which clearly has very rich heritage, very rich past. There are many people who still live in that part of the city who have memories of the place during the railways or still work there within the railway industry. And so how we take tourism and heritage and lift it clear of those people who currently take ownership of it, which are organisations like the National Railway Museum, which talks of itself as the beating cultural heart of York Central, and the other big cultural institutions within the city who are, kind of powerful institutions within the way the city works. How we take some of that ownership from them and give it to the communities themselves. How can we think about tourist activity and ways of experiencing York and that part of York and that part of York's history in ways which don't just involve going into the museum, but involve working with local people to share their stories, to share the richness of the place in more direct ways.
Probably from the late 80s into the early 90s, there was several groups or like-minded community people who were all getting together trying to find venues and spaces to use that were, shall we say, non-commercial entities. A lot of those spaces today no longer exist. They've now become commercialised entities where if you would like to do something that's outside of the norm, it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's getting harder to do in this city.
So I think about the bit before 2016, I was aware of the context of that, and I think we obviously met and there was an opportunity to do something that was about creating a new place and a new community-focused venue.
I was working at the Wetherspoons at the bottom of Piccadilly and would walk past what was the old Reynard's garage, and then when they knocked that down in 2015, there was just a big vacant space. I mean, effectively it was a big vacant space for 20 years, just it was inside a garage. But yeah, I think when you look at a street like Piccadilly in a place like York, one that doesn't fit that kind of narrative of tourism and that kind of postcard image of what York should be as a city, it's, 6 years down the line, I think while we've made an impact on that, you still, there's a demolition, I think, this month. Next door to us, there's demolitions that have happened in the last 6 months. We've had new hotels pop up, probably future hotels, luxury apartments. You look at that and still think,
yeah, certainly,
what direction is even this street as a microcosm of the whole city centre taking? And while we've had 3 extensions now on Piccadilly, and you kind of think, what's the longevity of this street?
I think that there's a danger that York could become a sort of one-trick pony as far as tourism is concerned. It needs to do more than just kind of repackage the same heritage. I think it needs to be more inclusive. It needs to have a really thriving mix of people in order to attract a diverse range of tourists in the future. I think there's a need to think about how can we have a fair approach to holiday lets in the city, like Airbnb. No one's saying that they shouldn't be there, but it's about how can they be part of a thriving mix which makes sure there's still room for younger people, for local people, for a wide diversity of people to live in the city. I think that there's something about how everyone who uses Airbnb, who uses platforms like this, thinks about the kind of impacts that their behaviour is having. Maybe it's about how we all think about how we use platforms like Airbnb, where we don't necessarily have that negative effect on historic cities like York, where there is a tendency for this type of property to dominate.
I grew up in Birmingham, so when I first came to York, the biggest thing that was glaring out to me was that lack of diversity in the city and inclusion. And over the 37 years that I've lived here, I haven't seen much improvement. There's over 100 different ethnic groups that live in York. It would be great to have a space where we can regularly showcase that and bring in that ethnic tourism. Last year, York saw its first York Health Mela. That was the opportunity for York, the wider community, to come in and have a look at what offerings we have in the city. The fantastic traditions, food, street food, dresses, costumes, learning different languages. It's just great to see that integration and people coming together, sharing their experiences and feeling like they belong in the city. For so long, communities have gone to other cities in the UK to meet their cultural requirements. York is ranked as, one of the top tourist destinations, so we should take advantage of that and showcase it in its whole glory. It would be a fantastic initiative if we can increase that ethnic tourism agenda and also improve things for citizens that are living in York. It's the only human rights city in the UK. It's a city of sanctuary. We need to just improve our diversity agenda and include it and factor it into our tourism agenda. Residents from a diverse background to feel like they belong in the city will in turn increase our tourism and make York a top destination. So it's really important that we include equality and diversity within the tourism strategy.
Hello everyone, my name is Jake. I am a trustee for York LGBT Forum. I live in York and I work in York as well. Today I'm here to talk about LGBT tourism. When I was a student at York St John University, I got involved with York Pride, which was part of York LGBT Forum. In those days, there was about 400 people who attended my first York Pride, which was in 2010. But I think the highlight for me, which really brought York Pride as a tourist destination, was in 2011, when we put a York Pride in memory of a very important human rights activist, David Kato. Sadly, after he returned to Uganda from his time studying in York, he was murdered after being outed in a magazine. In 2011, we held a memorial for him, and for the first time we saw people from around the world coming to York Pride. And that was, I think, an important moment in our history for LGBT York, because it gave that global appeal, of course, in a very sad circumstances. Moving forward now, York Pride is a lot bigger. This year it's on the 1st of June and we are expecting somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people. Thinking of all those people that come to York Pride, not all of them are from York. Many are tourists, and the money that brings to the local economy is quite substantial. From booking a hotel room, to an Airbnb, to going into restaurants and cafes, it really does create a new economic system when Pride is about. But what is important to highlight is some of the barriers that LGBT people still face when coming to York. This includes not being able to get accommodation because they're maybe the same gender, especially men, we have found. That can also include not being let in venues because you're a group of men as well. But we have also experienced it with groups of women and different genders, in particular trans people. So in terms of how I think we need to move forward is to bring more of an ethical tourism to York, to think about all of the inclusivity that York Pride brings. How can we bring that to the tourist community as a whole? We all remember the lockdown and how dreary that became when we weren't allowed to go out because of the pandemic. But from that came a wonderful bursting scene of queer energy where LGBT people are doing performances in different mediums across the city, including drag nights, spoken word, music nights, and so much more. And it's happening across York in different venues. And I think that's variety is really important for tourism and the tourist industry. So, looking at that, I think how the York tourism sector can interact with that is by promoting those events, by promoting what's going on for LGBT tourists to create a welcoming environment for all.
Hi, my name's Claire. I run an Airbnb which I live in, so I rent out 5 rooms. I also take photographs and make prints. As an artist living in York, there aren't really that many opportunities to showcase your work or even have exhibitions. However, there is the York Arts Market, which is great actually because local artists can rent a spot and show their work in summer. Obviously lots of tourists come down for that. Tourism in York for me is a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, because of what I do for my money, I do rent out rooms to tourists. However, I do feel that York, increasingly so, has become like a theme park. I live next door to a 12-person high-end luxury Airbnb with a hot tub, which is literally just at the other side of that fence with a sauna and a patio area. That's been going since August and it's been really horrible because it's for 12 people. Obviously it's not supposed to be for parties, but of course when you've got 12 people together it is a party. I've had to witness some quite unpleasant language and behaviour from people. So to resolve this issue, I have tried to speak to the manager, but I feel that she's very empathetic towards my situation. And so I have contacted Airbnb a couple of times because obviously they don't allow parties. And that is a really difficult process because you have to wait for ages to speak to somebody and then you send them evidence and then they say we've dealt with this issue, but actually they haven't really done anything. I have rang the City Council noise pollution people who on the whole have been really supportive, but really nothing's changed. It would be great actually if I could connect with other people that are also experiencing these issues, because I know it is quite widespread throughout York, and then possibly through the tourism strategy in York to raise awareness and residents' voices about how some sort of balance can be restored.
Hi, I'm Joe Coates. I am the promoter at the Crescent in York. Since we opened in 2015, I've been a live music promoter in York for nearly 20 years, and York is my hometown.
Hi, my name's Harkirit. I'm one of the venue and event managers here at the Crescent. So I think tourism is like a complicated word, really. It can have quite positive aspects to it in terms of bringing in investment to the city. It's a very popular tourist destination, but often I do wonder about what is the kind of tourism we're bringing to the city. And I think that in a way we need to be focusing on tourism that's maybe a bit more inclusive for the people who live here as well. I think that sometimes we get so focused on bringing in outside tourism that it kind of changes the fabric of the city in a way.
Certainly changes the feel of the city
Certainly.
when you go out in it.
Housing being unaffordable can all kind of be linked back to this issue.
Huge increase in Airbnbs.
Huge increase. So, I mean, on our street here at the Crescent, I'd say like the majority of the street now has become Airbnbs.
Well, we thought about joining them, didn't we, and buying one just because that's...
Because we can't afford hotels for artists. Because when you're looking at hotel prices of £200 a room, it's often ends up being more than the fee that you want to pay the band. You know, if you get 6, 7, 8 people in the band, it's becoming really difficult, especially with international touring artists where there is often an expectation that accommodation is going to be part of the deal. And I think that it's not just that aspect as well. It's like, you know, if we're pricing young creative people out of living in the city, people who are into music, into coming to gigs or just being involved in creative industries, we're not just kind of taking away the punters to the gigs, but also the kids who are going to be in the next band, you know, the kids who are thinking, oh, let's put a band together, and then they get to 18, 19 or whatever, and they're thinking like, what's our opportunities here? Maybe we should live somewhere with cheaper rent and, you know, a larger city with more venues, more gigs going on and so on.
The city centre regeneration follows the growth in visitors to the city, and we lost all of the working men's clubs, all of the live music venues, and they're all mostly student accommodation or hotels now, and we still can't afford the hotel rooms.
We still can't afford the hotel rooms, yeah. So as that declines, right, we're actually changing the nature of the people who choose to come to York.
We're trying to fill the calendar in a venue of 365 days a week, potentially, and how many external local promoters do we do?
2 or 3, really. And you know, of them actually are local, like.
Yeah,
you know?
and how many of them are doing progressive, interesting, arts-focused things? No, quite.
What they're going for is maybe like safe bets, you know.
Yeah, and some money, and and actually, it's not adding anything to the creative scene in the city, really. It's all but evaporated. Full for dancers, of course. Amazing.
I think one thing that the city could be doing better is when you make a strategy, kind of take itself a bit more seriously. So I was involved, and it kind of really happened a lot over the lockdown. The only reason really that I was able to do that during the lockdowns is because there weren't many gigs to put on.
Yeah, you have to be committed.
Yeah,
right?
You have to be very committed.
Probably what you really need is an individual who is committed enough for it to be a job.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea of like night mayors, I think, is a really interesting idea, and it's been done well in some places, not done well in the other. Someone who is more tasked with looking after growing the nighttime economy and kind of viewing that as a very separate strategy from your daytime economy, which might be more focused on your high street, your art galleries, and so on.
Especially as there's been a cultural shift. People do not drink like they used to.
Yeah.
A lot less alcohol focused.
Yeah.
A lot of broader like leisure activities on a night.
Yeah.
And having somebody who's like individually focused and tasked with making it better brings the responsibility down to the one person, and that would be someone who's passionate about it.
So you have to find that balance, but generally speaking, having a much more dedicated strategy for the nighttime economy would really help. I felt the creative strategy in York, even though we spent a lot of time feeding into it, ultimately I felt it felt like wasted time. I remember, you know, one thing I was pushing for a while is when you go to other cities like Leeds, Manchester, I remember going even to tiny place Dijon in France, which York is twinned with. All these places have columns where they publicise local events and so on. And I was trying to push for a while that I think this would be a really good thing for the city. It would look after, it's a cheap one-off investment, look after itself, people would pay to market on there. National promoters might pay a lot more and enable a lot of the kind of community-driven events to be advertised on there for at cost.
Make It York have never come to the Crescent community venue in the 8.5, 9 years we've been here to talk to us about anything to do with bringing people to the city, and we are absolutely key in bringing people with artistic mind to York.
Hi, my name's Ali Bodley. I'm a heritage consultant. I'm a resident in York. I've lived here 25 years or more. And I've been to a lot of the festivals, but I tend to only go once because they don't change much. It's great for tourism, but there's not much there for local people. It would be brilliant if the festivals could come out into local shopping areas or local areas and engage people in a very positive, proactive way, drawing on our local history. There's a lot in York, Romans, Vikings, but also ordinary people who've lived good lives here. The festivals need to be better, wider and more inclusive. Sometimes when I go into York, I look around York and it's very drab, and my heart sinks because I think the tourists deserve better, and I know locals deserve better as well. And tourists are using all our facilities. I don't see why there shouldn't be a tourist tax. Not a massive one, but £2 on a night's accommodation, no one would even notice. And that could go into replenishing the streets, but also replenishing our heritage. We've got fabulous museums, and like a lot of the world at the moment, they've been depleted of resources through cuts. So any money raised in this way, it would be good for tourism, it would be good for the locals, and it would make us proud and prouder of the place that we live in. There's a lot of empty shops within York. It's not uncommon with a lot of places. Again, it makes the place look just not nice, not welcoming. And some of these shops are there because they're being owned by investment companies, and it's an investment for them, but it's not an investment for the community, it's not an investment for the tourists either. If this is going to happen, if people want to buy property like that, then there should be an obligation that they need to put back into the community as well, and just not have these empty premises. It's destroying communities and city centres, and again, we all deserve better.
Hi, I'm Helen Jones from York Disability Rights Forum. Interestingly, I am actually about to go on holiday. I'm going to Ireland, and the particular part of Ireland I'm going to has been determined mostly through lack of choice rather than through choice. There is a lack of accessible information out there about accessible accommodation, about accessible venues. That experience will echo with people coming to York. It echoes with disabled travellers across the world. Coming to York, in terms of York city centre itself, you go down one of the main streets, you're dealing with cobbles, you're dealing with a lack of blue badge parking, you're facing lots and lots of shops and businesses and attractions that it's not clear whether you can get into them or not as a wheelchair user. You might get into a venue, and then if you're deaf, maybe you can't actually engage in something that's part of it, or if you're blind, you might not be able to have the same experience. And finding out whether you can or can't have the same experience or even enter a space is difficult. There's a lack of information out there. In York city centre, another key issue is around the lack of accessible toilets. A lot of small local shops, businesses, in particular restaurants and cafes, don't have accessible toilets, and definitely do not have a changing places toilet. That means that tourists are reliant on the public changing places, which close. Depending on which one you're going to, what time of the year it is, it could be closing at 7 o'clock at night. If you are a disabled tourist coming to York, wanting to go out on a night out, go to a restaurant in the evening, your choices are being determined by the availability of toilets. When we're thinking about tourists coming to York, obviously they need to have accommodation. Lack of information, again, presents a problem. But so does lack of equipment. Finding accommodation in York that has, for example, a hoist is difficult. If you do find somewhere, the chances are it is not in the city centre. The chances are you are having to travel from the city centre to your accommodation, which means you are either reliant on your own transport, public transport, which in the case of a wheelchair user, if you've got more than one wheelchair user in your group, you have to get one bus at a time, if the wheelchair space is available. If you are blind or deaf and the audio-visual information on the bus isn't working, you don't know when to get off. And wheelchair taxis in York are an ongoing issue. There isn't enough of them, and tourists probably wouldn't expect not to be able to book one. In terms of thinking more solution-based, accommodation like hotels, B&Bs, self-catering accommodations could use an equipment bank. There could be some kind of model where they pay a certain amount per year and they have access to this equipment that is based in York somewhere. That immediately makes life easier for disabled tourists. It can be as simple as having a ramp available to hire or having a toilet frame. These aren't big things, but they make a big difference. Having one core centralised place for information for tourists, and it can be filtered by a particular impairment. So it could be that if you are blind, you're looking for a particular attraction, or if you're a wheelchair user, you're looking to see what accommodation you can actually use. And it would need to be verified. There's a big problem in the tourism industry is places saying that they are accessible when in reality they aren't, and often people don't find that out until they are there, when it is too late, and it ruins holidays. Depth. And it's important to remember that solutions for disabled residents will benefit disabled tourists and everyone else. A really obvious example of that is drop curbs. They help wheelchair users and they help people who are carrying luggage, pushing luggage, or who have got a pushchair with them. Solutions that help disabled people help everybody.